On May 11, 1995, Tom Kalinske, then president and CEO of Sega of America, took the stage for a press conference at the first E3 and announced to the world that the successor to the Genesis, the Sega Saturn, was already in stores. A move that surprised not only journalists in attendance, but also many third-party software publishers and retailers. I do not believe it's hyperbole to say that day was the point at which Sega's fate as a console manufacturer was effectively sealed. The die was cast that Thursday morning in Los Angeles. Or was it?
And since I began my remarks with an announcement, I may as well finish with another. We started our rollout of Sega Saturn yesterday. We're at retail today.
Introducing Sega Saturn. Aww, hit it!
Hello friends, I'm Joe, and welcome to Same Name, Different Game Gaiden. Yes, this month marks the 25th anniversary of the Sega Saturn's surprise North American launch, and since it is one of my favorite platforms, I simply had to mark the occasion. I gave my Patreon supporters some choices on how they would like me to do so, and they overwhelmingly chose a look at the Japanese library and how it differed from the West. So let's do what wrestling fans like to call a little fantasy booking. Much hay has already been made about Sega's various business decisions during this chapter of their history. Tom Kalinske has made it very clear he did not want to go forward with the surprise launch, but Sega of Japan forced his hand, and, well, there's a lot. A good starting point, if you don't already know about this stuff, would be to watch Kim Justice's excellent video about Sega in 1995. I'm not here to relitigate any of that stuff. I just want to talk about games. In preparation for this, I took a look back at gaming magazines of the time, and while a lot of the enthusiast press loved the potential of the Saturn, even from the beginning they had concerns about the software library. In their 1995 year-end roundup, Game Player's bottom line on the Saturn said,
"Third-party development for the Saturn is still not quite up to par."
And as time went on, it didn't get better. In December of 1996, Next Generation's year-end roundup voiced concerns about
a shortage of killer games.
That led them to ponder,
will Saturn be the TurboGrafx 16 of the next generation?
By the end of 1997, Sega's prospects were not good in the view of the gaming press. Writing in the EGM 1998 Video Game Buyer's Guide, published in December of 1997, editor John Riccardi said he loved the Saturn,
but I can't possibly see the system surviving another year in the States.
Though I am happy to report that he was wrong. Kind of. The final US release on the Saturn was Magic Knight Rayearth, an RPG from Sega that was published in 1995 in Japan, but didn't go west until December of 1998, courtesy of Working Designs. On the other hand, it was only the 8th game released that year in North America, and the first one since July. Meanwhile, Japan's final release came in December of 2000, more than 2 years after the Dreamcast hit that territory. When all was said and done, the US had 246 Saturn releases, while Japan saw over 1,000. 3/4 of the library was left in the land of the rising sun, and in my opinion, a good portion of it could have served to make the Saturn a powerhouse for, yes, an audience smaller than the PS1, but still dedicated and profitable, at least up until the September 1999 release of the Dreamcast in North America. Earlier, I mentioned Next Generation Magazine's 1996 year-end feature, and while they weren't bullish on the system exactly, they did offer a ray of hope, saying,
Sony's policy of nixing any software submitted for approval that doesn't showcase the PlayStation's 3D capabilities has handed Saturn the 2D market.
Now, the common wisdom would have you believe that 2D was out of fashion by that time, that 3D was the new hotness, with fans and critics dismissing 2D games as ugly and old-fashioned, which, in hindsight, is a little bit hilarious, but also sadly a little bit true. But that didn't stop 2D games from becoming hits. After all, the Neo Geo, a system originally released in 1990, continued to have software support until 2004. Speaking of the Neo Geo, a big thing that makes the Saturn an interesting system, particularly in a modern context, is that a huge portion of the games that made it worth owning in all territories were arcade ports. During this time, publishers and players alike were still chasing the holy grail of arcade perfection at home. And this is where the Japanese Saturn in particular delivered. Even a few games fans think of first and foremost as Saturn, like Radiant Silvergun, began life in the arcade. But if you are a shoot-'em-up or fighting game fan, the Japanese Saturn library has you covered in a way the US simply didn't. Which, again, illustrates that this system should have been pushed as a niche system for the hardcore set. I mean, sure, the US got a few, like X-Men Children of the Atom and Galactic Attack, the head-scratchingly generic title given to the Saturn port of Ray Force from Taito, but the well goes so much deeper in Japan. Starting with shoot-'em-ups, the Saturn had a huge stable of arcade ports that, even today, haven't come home in another format. The aforementioned Radiant Silvergun took until 2011 to hit the Xbox 360 and still hasn't gotten any additional releases. On top of that, games like Cotton 2, Cotton Boomerang, Skullfang, and even prolific STG developer Toaplan's swan song Batsugun continue to exist either as arcade PCBs or Saturn discs, with no other options to this day. Moving on to fighting games, a big problem here was the lack of the RAM expansion carts in North America, coming in both 1 meg and 4 meg flavors, as well as a couple of ROM carts that work specifically with certain games. These were completely absent from the North American market, but were necessary to run a handful of marquee games. The 1 meg cart was used on a lot of Neo Geo ports, and at the time, aside from getting an actual Neo Geo AES or CD, both of which were still expensive, these were by far the best ports of those games, including several entries in the King of Fighters and Samurai Showdown series, though, for my money, the crown jewel of them is Real Bout Fatal Fury Special, which yes, did get a PS1 port in Japan, but never hit the US. The 4 meg cart is where the real big names are though. While the US version of Marvel Superheroes still benefits from the optional use of the cart, it was required for Capcom's heaviest hitters: X-Men vs. Street Fighter, Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter, and of course, Street Fighter Alpha 3. Vampire Savior, the Japanese version of Darkstalkers 3, also used it. All of these games had PS1 ports, but especially the Versus games were pitiful when compared to the Saturn ports. What didn't hit the PS1 at all was the excellent Dungeons & Dragons collection, also requiring the 4 meg RAM cart, and those Saturn versions were the only home ports of Capcom's classic belt scrollers until 2013, when they finally got wider release as Chronicles of Mystara. And on that note, while the library is rife with shooters and fighters, as with the D&D collection, there are games in other genres that were popular. Fire Pro Wrestling was everywhere in Japan during the 90s, but of course didn't head west at all in any form until the new millennium and the Game Boy Advance. But pro wrestling was headed into one of its biggest boom periods in the late 90s, and one of the great hidden gems of that era was Blazing Tornado, aka Fire Pro Gaiden, an attempt by Human to merge Fire Pro with the more arcade style of something like Saturday Night Slam Masters, and it was released only in the arcade and on the Saturn. It's a great looking and very fun grappler that could have caught on in the era of the NWO and Stone Cold Steve Austin. And how could I not mention Castlevania Symphony of the Night, a PS1 port that should have made the journey west. The Saturn's version isn't perfect or even particularly good, but it was a super popular game on Sony's platform and had added content that even today remains exclusive to Sega's platform. Why not release it here? There are even a handful of true system exclusives we didn't get. I won't go too into them because this is Roger's territory usually, but consider one he's already talked about. Deep Fear. It came to the UK but never made it to the colonies, and in an era when Resident Evil 2 was tearing up the charts, seems like a huge missed opportunity. And while I said most of the shoot-'em-ups on the Saturn were arcade ports, Blastwind, a vertical shooter from Thunder Force developer Technosoft, remains tied to Sega's 5th generation machine. Now, of course, I understand there's a lot going on here. Many of these games are from third parties, so Sega couldn't have unilaterally released them, but they could have given them some motivation. More than a handful of games published by Sega in Japan were released here by Working Designs and other third parties. And what kind of message does that send about your confidence in your own software? Now, I know some software stores did start selling Saturn imports in 97 and 98, but that simply is not the same as official English language releases with wide distribution. Ultimately, could any or even all of these games have made the Saturn a rival to the PS1 in the West? No, I don't think so. There were too many other factors at play, mostly that retailers and publishers were enraged by that surprise launch in 1995. But more of these games alongside canny advertising to the crowd that read Die Hard Game Fan or Next Generation could have at least put Sega of America in black ink. We'll never know, of course, but for my money, the Saturn is a great system that produced some of the most beautiful-looking 2D games in history, and remains worth owning to this day. So happy American birthday, Saturn. You deserved better. I'm Joe, and coming up later this month, we'll be diving even deeper into the Sega Saturn's North American launch with a special same-name, different game mainline episode. I'll see you then. Hey folks, thanks so much for watching. Shoutouts to Dan, aka Sega from Console Wars, for being the voice of Game Players Magazine, Cyril from Defunct Games for being the voice of John Riccardi of EGM, and the biggest shout out to Pandemonium for helping with research and fact-checking, as well as providing the voice of the editors of Next Generation magazine. Links to all of their channels are in the description. If you like what you saw, do all the stuff. Like, comment, subscribe, ring the stupid bell. Tell me what your favorite Saturn import is below. If you really liked the video, consider supporting the show on Patreon. Just $1 per video gets you early access, your name here with these cool people, and the chance to vote on video topics, just like this one. If you want more Saturn, the video on the left is on Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter, and the video on the right is on Die Hard Arcade.